So today we're focusing on Pickering and Rangel fellowships. So these are fellowships that offer a huge amount of support for those of you interested. Well, I assume everyone here is interested actually in a career in the Foreign Service, at least one of the potential pathways that you might be interested in. So these fellowships offer a huge range of support towards that pathway. They offer, funded graduate study, mentorship. We'll discuss that a little bit more, and helping you get into that career, which can otherwise be difficult, as some of you may know. So helping you understand kind of like the process and more of the logistics here, and then encourage you, if you're interested in these, to follow up with our office because we do offer support. And then of course, we're giving you the opportunity to talk with fellows here as well. So just a little bit about the fellowship benefits. So these fellowships are supporting you for 2 years of a master's program related to the Foreign Service, which actually can be a broad array of programs. So we're talking like business administration, public policy, international relations. Did I say public administration? A whole range. It just has to be related to the Foreign Service in some way. So it's $42,000 annually for that 2-year period. That covers tuition, room, board, and also additional fees. And then what I would also mention, because you might be thinking, oh, that may not cover all components of my program, there are also partner arrangements with a number of institutions that offer additional financial support. So in some ways, the fellowship is providing kind of the initial support and that framework, and then there's additional kind of benefits that come with this. Then they offer the orientation to the program in the Foreign Service. They offer mentorship from a Foreign Service officer who's been through the process themselves, who can help you think about how to navigate these kinds of opportunities. And then they come with these internships. So Rangel, and I should say, and actually I think this is my next slide, Rangel and Pickering offer very similar amounts of support. They both have the same kind of objectives here to support you on your trajectory into the Foreign Service. They offer slightly different kinds of internships. They both offer one internship, summer internship, that's going to be abroad at an embassy or consulate. And they offer one internship that is going to be based in DC, either on Capitol Hill, working with members of Congress on issues related to international relations, or at the State Department. So both are providing you with 2 summer internships that look slightly different, funding you for your graduate program, and then helping you proceed to that career in the Foreign Service for those who successfully meet the program, fulfill the program requirements and entry requirements. So here's just kind of a breakdown of what this looks like. So same benefits as I mentioned, different kind of timing and internship venues at different moments in your graduate career. So Rangel would be offering the internship on Capitol Hill, once again, working with members of Congress this summer before entering graduate school. So if you were thinking about applying to Rangel and Pickering this upcoming cycle, which would mean that you're applying in October to these fellowships, you would be seeking to go to graduate school in the fall of 2022. So Rangel, the first summer internship would happen not this summer, the next summer before entering graduate school. And then the overseas internship happens between your first and second year of graduate school. Whereas for Pickering, their first internship actually happens after your first year of graduate school, and that's at the State Department before then you go on to do an overseas internship. So slightly different structure, but once again, otherwise offering the same amount of funding and support. And people always ask, wait, so should I only apply to one, or do I have to change my application drastically? Like, no, I mean, you're doing the work of applying to one of these fellowships. And so that's what's great is oftentimes once you go through the process of applying to one of these fellowships, you can adapt your materials for the other one. So that's why we are putting them together in this way in the work that we do. Okay, so eligibility, basic eligibility here. You have to be a US citizen, a cumulative GPA of 3.2 plus. Beyond that, they don't care. And then seeking admission to a 2-year full-time on-campus master's program. I mean, now we're hopefully moving to actually being on campus again. Master's program at a US institution that would start in the fall of 2022. So if you were interested in applying to Rangel and Pickering, you would also separately need to be considering the master's programs of interest to you to apply separately. So Rangel and Pickering become the support mechanisms and offer the kind of mentorship and development and professional development in that way, but you do have to apply separately to those programs. So that would be, if this is of interest to you, this is something that in the next several months, start browsing those kinds of programs that you might be preparing applications for. So those would begin in the fall of 2022. I can't believe we're already in 2022, like thinking ahead to 2022. Something to keep on your radar. Okay, fields of study. As I mentioned, this is pretty broad. It has to be related to the Foreign Service in some way, but there are many kinds of disciplinary fields and topical fields that this would cover. So we're thinking about international affairs, public policy or administration. We've actually had a number of Georgetown fellows who have been going like the public policy administration route. People who do communications, focusing on foreign languages, political science or history, and economics or business administration. So as you may know, there are 5 different kind of career tracks within the Foreign Service. And so depending upon what kind of track that you're ultimately interested in, you might be pursuing different kinds of graduate programs. For instance, there's like the consular track, there's the political track and economics track. And I'll talk a little bit about those later in terms of thinking about where is that alignment between your interests and your future potentially graduate program and track in the Foreign Service. Who are they looking for? So your first point of eligibility would be if you are a junior now rising senior. So this would be the first moment at which you could apply, because you would have your bachelor's degree in hand and then be able to start your graduate program the academic year following when you graduate. But we also often have many recent alums or young professionals who are applying to Rangel and Pickering. And considering that these fellowships are looking for people who have a demonstrated interest in these kinds of careers and international relations and in this kind of engagement, those people with additional experience oftentimes can show that demonstrated commitment. So I should mention that my office or center works with both current students and alums. So you could be sitting here as a junior, rising senior, and think, you know what, I'm really interested in this kind of career pathway and these fellowships, but it's probably a little bit too early for me to apply. And maybe I'd be interested in applying 3 years down the road. Well, you could come back and work with us 3 years or 4 years, 5 years down the road. I've certainly worked with people who are like 5 years out from Georgetown, and we will support you through the process. So that's just something important to note. You just want to make sure to get on our listserv, because we have listservs every single year to advise on these fellowships. In terms of background, major, and topical field, welcoming any major or interest, provided that you have this kind of demonstrated commitment to going into the Foreign Service. Obviously, people who want to represent the U.S. well as diplomats, I mean, there is the importance placed on those who are interested and committed to cultural exchange. So there should be some element of that in your background in terms of how you've engaged with your communities and reflected or demonstrated that mindset. And then Rangel and Pickering, because they are committed to diversifying those who are in the Foreign Service, are interested in different types of diversity. They're looking to encourage applications from those from minority backgrounds, women, those with financial need, but it doesn't just end at those kinds of categories. There are other ways in which you might be underrepresented, and those would be certainly ones to speak to or highlight in the application. So for instance, you're from an underrepresented geographic region. I'm from Colorado, which isn't exactly underrepresented, but maybe you're from Idaho. I mean, like that's interesting, and that would be an underrepresented geographic region. So I think in some ways you can think a little bit more creatively about in what ways your profile speaks to these other elements of diversity. So the commitment to diversifying the Foreign Service, and there's different ways in which you might fulfill that, but that is important to Rangel and Pickering. Okay, other things that they value and what makes a profile or a candidate particularly competitive. So as I mentioned, given that these careers revolve around, I mean, this is within the State Department, Foreign Service work, given that what is absolutely critical to this work is a commitment to cultural exchange, cultural understanding, that interest in the world, I'm going to like writ large, it would be expected that there are elements of your kind of background experiences and profile that demonstrate that kind of commitment and interest. So How have you engaged in your communities? I mean, whether you have been part of certain kind of like affinity organizations or clubs at Georgetown, or engaged in volunteer work, community service. I mean, the Center for Social Justice, have you been engaged in that way? Are there ways in which your background and your kind of experiences demonstrate resourcefulness and resiliency? Because obviously the work of being a Foreign Service officer relies upon those kinds of characteristics as well. Have you demonstrated interest in other cultures? If your profile at all didn't demonstrate any kind of interest in engaging kind of your communities in the world, that might be a little bit of a red flag. I mean, they might say like, did you just wake up last night and think like this seemed like a cool career path? So there should be some sort of interest, whether you studied foreign languages, whether you've studied abroad when you had the chance to study abroad, or you're anticipating studying abroad, or just engaged in different kinds of communities, as I said, more locally. Any of those kinds of things might count. Strong leadership skills in terms of not just like I was the president of an organization, but I was committed to my communities in whatever that way that looked. Maybe perhaps you helped organize conferences or helped to organize other kinds of events within your community. I have your interest in management, economics, and consular affairs. This isn't, so the reason that originally had this is because, so as I said, there are 5 kind of career tracks, and you might have an interest in particular ones. Now I'm like blanking on what it's actually called. The political track is oftentimes more represented or very applied to, but it's weird because it's not actually like you're applying to that particular track, but there are perhaps more people that are interested in like the political cone than there are in consular affairs. So just to say, if you were interested in one of these like management, economics, or consular affairs, that may make you particularly interesting, but that's not necessarily weighed in the review process for an application. And then first generation college students, that also, because it's an element of, I think, diversifying the pool of those who are in the Foreign Service, and particularly interested in supporting those who are first generation college students in entering this kind of path. But lots of different things that they value. That's just like a snapshot. In terms of application components, what you would need for both Rangel and Pickering would basically be the exact same. So this is where I said, where if you're applying to one, you apply to both. They include the application that includes background information. They include 3 statements that are all relatively short. The most important one would be the personal statement. So this is where you have the opportunity to speak to your motivation, your experiences, what draws you to these fellowships and the Foreign Service. There's a new, it was just introduced this past year, statement on planning and organizing, an example of the ways in which you have planned and organized something to demonstrate that kind of like resourcefulness and organization. There's also a statement of financial need, because once again, these fellowships are interested in supporting those who might not otherwise have the opportunity to pursue these kinds of pathways. So those are the shorter statements. Then of course, we'll need the transcript, 2 letters of recommendation, one which would be from a professor or instructor who knows you academically, and then one perhaps who's more familiar with your extracurricular work or co-curricular work, community engagement. So for now, we're still a ways out from the application deadlines, but you might start thinking about who are the people who would be best positioned to speak in enthusiastic detail about me. And we do have resources on our website for how to best support those recommenders to ensure that they have all the information that they need to write the strongest letter of recommendation for you. And then some other kind of forms, including financial aid information and proof of US citizenship. Okay, just some brief application tips. And once again, this is just to start thinking about this now, but it might be more so you're starting to reflect on your experiences rather than dive into the application at this point in time. And indeed, the applications aren't even available yet. So these are kind of just things to think ahead to. But keeping in mind that these fellowships are looking for demonstrated commitment to issues related to the Foreign Service, or kind of your excitement about kind of serving in this kind of diplomatic capacity. I think an important component of this is that reflection work of taking stock of your experiences and thinking about in what ways have I cultivated the skills or gained the experience, had my perspective informed by the work that I was doing in ways that connect to what that work in the Foreign Service entails. And so something I would encourage you to look at is or are the 13 dimensions that are important to Foreign Service officers. Now, this is not to say that you should think about producing an application that's like a checkbox thing, kind of like, oh, this is the way I demonstrated composure. This is the way that I demonstrated cultural adaptability. This is the way that I demonstrate experience and motivation. This is just to say that I would encourage you to browse or review these 13 dimensions and think about what are the ones that strike you or jump out at you in terms of how you have cultivated those kinds of skill sets, or like those have been important values of yours that you've sought to, center your work around. So there might be a few of these, like say that is like initiative and leadership and cultural adaptability. Perhaps there are like a few of these that particularly resonate with you, given the ways in which you've engaged previously or the experiences that you've had. And then think about using those as kind of like thematic categories to talk about your experiences. So the ways in which you've cultivated or honed your kind of like adaptability or practice that. And so think about the ways in which your experiences might kind of like tag on to particular dimensions. Once again, not to be like a checkbox form or the ways in which, or a list of these are the ways in which my experiences have related to each one of these 13 dimensions, but which ones resonate most with you, or which ones are the ones that you might highlight in your personal statement. That would be something that I would think about doing in the next the coming several months, is doing this reflection work. Okay, and then the other thing is thinking about the track within the Foreign Service that excites you. Once again, there's no sense of like, we must have this number of Rangel fellows or Pickering fellows that are interested in these particular tracks in the Foreign Service. But I think it's very helpful to think about what track or tracks most interest you, because it almost serves as an anchor point for you when you are discussing your own experiences in the application, to think about, well, what are the dimensions that are particularly important to those tracks that I feel very strong in and that I might highlight in my personal statement. And so there are these great resources on the State Department website that's like a little quiz about which career track is right for you. And I don't know if you like those kinds of quizzes as much as I do. I love those kinds of things. They're like, what should you be? I mean, like going back to like BuzzFeed quizzes. But you might just take this quiz just to see kind of what track might engage more in the type of kind of work and responsibilities that you're most drawn to. So it would be helpful to do that and then think of that in terms of the 13 dimensions. Think about what are the dimensions that I think really speak to my own experiences or relate to my own experiences that then I would want to really highlight in the application. And then I might also talk to my recommenders as being ones that I think prepare me for this kind of work. Okay, I realize I'm going over time here, so I'll wrap this up. And then timeline, in terms of timeline. So can't believe we're already in May, but we are in May. So I would say that this month and the next month would be thinking about, starting to think about things like who would you want to write for you, doing this work of reflecting upon your experiences, to think about what might you speak to in your application. Then you would start drafting, perhaps July, August, September, revising with feedback from our office. Make sure that you're sending those drafts to your recommenders so that they have that as kind of a reference point as well when they're writing their letters of recommendation. And also over the summer, doing research into potential graduate programs as well that you might be applying to start in the fall of 2022, as I said. And then Rangel and Pickering, their deadlines are typically like a week apart. This past year they were in October. It was like October 14th and the 21st, I think. So looking ahead to those deadlines, and then the interviews, they each bring 90 finalists to DC this year. It was all virtual, but understandably so. But typically would be bringing those finalists to DC for the interviews, both a written component and then an interview component with 3 individuals, and then they make the selections. Okay, good. That's it. Before we go into the Q&A, are there any questions about the application itself that we can use? Yes, cones. I said tracks. Cones might be another, is the other phrase to use. So when we think about the political cone, the economics cone, management cone, those ones. And then someone asked, can we use the same essays for both? Yes, you can adapt the same essays. Of course, you would just want to make sure that you're not saying, I'm so eager to apply to the Rangel Fellowship for the Pickering Fellowship application that does not reflect that you reviewed your materials closely. So yes. Any other questions about the application that I can answer before we move into our next portion? Yes, Lauren.
Yeah, I was just wondering if like the statement of financial need and like the financial aid letter, are those like required elements of the application that everyone submits?
Yes, the statement of financial need would be one of the required statements. And so that, sorry, were you saying something else? No. And that would be the place where you would talk about, so there's a range, I mean, there's different things that you can talk about here. So anything that, any kind of like funds that you've had to rely upon, or any kind of like family circumstances that have affected your kind of situation. If you received scholarships for Georgetown to fund your studies, those kinds of things would be ones that you would include in that statement. And then also in that statement would perhaps be a discussion of, okay, so let's say like you're interested in the Columbia, like a master's program at Columbia, and that costs $45,000 a year. I don't know, now maybe I should check to see how much the programs cost now, but let's say that costs $45,000 a year. And you'd say, so this particular master's program at Columbia in total will cost this amount of money. I will not be able to afford that program without taking out this amount of loans, or funding my own studies through like part-time work on the side. So it's not just about perhaps kind of financial need or financial challenges, or kind of like familial circumstances that have kind of affected you up to this point. It can also be talking about, this is the reality of what my financial situation will look like. And that indeed, without these fellowships, I would not have the means to pursue a graduate program at this time. So that can all be in the financial statement.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah. I don't know who was next. Whoever was.
Hi, my name is LaShawn. I had a question. So I graduated from Georgetown a while ago, like maybe more than a decade. And I was wondering if there's an age cap on this. I'm looking into a career change. And I'm especially asking this because it says that you have to live on campus. Like, I have a husband and children. Like, is that required? Am I moving my family into the dorm?
You mean for the graduate school school process? I may have to ask the fellows who are on. We have Hamad and Hira who are here. I don't know if they know when we go into. I don't know if, I don't think there is an age cut up, though. I would be wrong. I would defer to the experts here. Do either of you know?
I'm happy to answer questions about the foreign service, the foreign service, culture, lifestyle, and stuff like that. But for application eligibility, I think the best people to ask are the people who administer the program.
Yeah. So we'll come back to that question perhaps later. Yeah. And then who's next here? Go ahead. I'm like trying to get my participants up to see whose hands are raised. Arthur.
Awesome, thank you. I just wanted to ask if you could talk a little bit more about the interview component, or specifically within the interview component, what does the written part look like?
Okay. You know what, I want to go to the fellows who are here first. And I think because I want to be respectful of their time, that they're here. And then at the end of it, I'll hang around to answer additional questions. I know, Laura, you also had a question. Great. And yes, in the chat, you'll find additional resources. So I'll hang around afterwards. I want to respect their time. So I'll let you both introduce yourselves. First, if you can just share a little bit about kind of your background, what your career kind of has looked like to date. And then I think we'll open up to questions for you about your kind of experiences, both on these fellowships and in your careers. So Kira, I don't know if you want to go first.
Sure, you might want to stop your screen share.
Oh, yes. Let me.
So my name is Hira Cambodge. I applied to the Pickering and Rangel fellowships in 2003. It was like the second year they'd had Rangel. I did not apply to Rangel. I didn't know about it at the time. And I actually applied to it. I found it on my own, but we actually had a fellowship program much like this at my university. So I have served, I'm public diplomacy coned. For information on the cones and what might interest you, go to careers.state.gov. I have served in Mexico, Kabul, Mexico City, Kabul, Chennai, Dubai, and most recently in Washington, D.C. And I, alongside of Hamad this year, we are two fellows at Georgetown University. So we get a year off, get our salaries paid to teach a course at Georgetown. It's been a really great opportunity. And I will return to the State Department this summer for another Washington, D.C. job. Over to you, Hamad.
Hi, everyone. I'm a Rangel Fellow from 2009. I graduated from Georgetown in 2008 out of School of Foreign Service. And I'm political coned. My overseas tours have been Caracas, Venezuela, Mexico City, Mexico. I worked on Libya from Tunis, Tunisia, and a few assignments here in Washington. And I'm headed to Rome next month for my next assignment.
So perhaps just to start, if you could both talk about the kind of components of your careers that you've enjoyed to date, perhaps like the challenges that you've encountered. And then also, I think talking about the network of the fellows in both Rangel and Pickering, what that's been like in terms of support throughout your careers to date as well.
I'll answer that very briefly because I want to be sure to get to the students' questions, which I'm happy to answer. I want to give them what the information they want and need. But basically, I'm still in touch with everybody from my cohort. My year was the first year they had 20 applicants. Back then, you applied as a sophomore. I think it's better now that they make you apply when you're older because so much happens in those years between being a sophomore and a senior in your life. But it was really great. And, some people, you're not sure what to expect of it, but I've been in the Foreign Service now 14 years. So clearly it has worked for me thus far. I just really wanted to serve our country. And that was my number one calling. So this just provided a really great opportunity to do that.
Yeah, I would say both fellowships offer really unique internship opportunities. I interned at the embassy in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, as well as the Rangel, you do a domestic internship on the Hill to understand the legislature. And the Pickering, I believe you do an internship at the State Department in Washington. I actually did an internship at the White House because I had applied separately and I convinced them to pay for my internship that way, which was great. But no, it's a great opportunity to get to meet other people who are interested in national affairs. I would say the most competitive applicants, to get to one of the questions that was asked earlier, are the ones who have been actually out of undergrad for a while. I served on the Rangel selection panels last year, and students who had done Fulbrights, who had worked abroad, who had worked overseas, or just worked domestically but wanted to change careers but had kind of an international focus, often were the most competitive applicants because they had that experience to demonstrate kind of what they would bring to the Foreign Service versus people who are still undergraduates. That's not to say that you're not competitive as an undergraduate. It's just to say that if you don't get it your first time, not to despair and to apply after a few years of work as well. But yeah.
And we've certainly had a number of Georgetown students who have reapplied, or alums who have reapplied and been successful in the second time. So just to echo that. Okay, we'll do questions then if you either want to chat the questions or we can do the hand raise feature as well. Yeah, LaShawn?
No, I had already asked my question
Okay.
about
Then we'll go to Laura.
yeah.
And LaShawn, your question about living on campus, I did not live on campus and that was not an issue. So I don't know if that's changed, but it's probably just I'm not sure where that came from, but I think the point is that you can't, live remote. It's probably has to do with the remote study. So if someone's at home for this year of grad school, they probably are not funding you to live with like your parents or your permanent address. So you have to be in the same city as your school probably. So I'm guessing that's where that confusion came from.
Okay, Laura?
Hello. Hi, Laura. It's so nice to see you again. And I'm so glad to be able to join you today. So I have two questions. The first one is, how can you become a more competitive applicant? And a little background, I applied last year and I've been wanting to be in the Foreign Service since I was literally 16. And hearing what Laura has said, I trust her fully because she helped me with my Fulbright grant. I think that I'm a good candidate for these opportunities. I'm interested in foreign relations. I speak 3 languages. I have experience abroad. I have a genuine love for service. But how can you make yourself more competitive when so many people are applying to these fellowships and everyone is absolutely amazing? And my second question is, do you have any advice for people who are applying and perhaps feel a little anxious or heartbroken because they didn't get it in another round, or they're starting to feel like this dream is kind of impossible?
I will just start with one quick story, which is when I was taking the Foreign Service exam many, many years ago, they had the story of this one ambassador who took the exam 7 times. And also remember, this is not the only way to get into the Foreign Service. So I'm saying dual track it, apply. If the Foreign Service is your dream, apply, even if you don't get the Pickering or Rangel fellowship. I had a minority colleague, went to MSFS for grad school, and he worked as a PMF. And then he worked as a civil service person at the State Department. And then he eventually got a slot in the Foreign Service and he made it in. And he still, he went to great school like Georgetown, like you all did. But he still got in. So yes, I think it's great to get your education fully funded. But if you already know it's your dream career, dual track it. Don't put all your eggs in one basket.
I would completely agree with Hira, and I would just say, in terms of the application itself, focusing on your statements, making your story compelling. If each panel is reading thousands of applications, how do you stand out? I don't think there is a single, combination of things that causes any one person to be selected. I think kind of going back to what Laura said in the beginning, looking at the criteria, tying it back to the Foreign Service, thinking about, what kind of diverse perspectives did you bring into the Foreign Service and highlighting that, making sure you choose recommenders who know you well, are all ways to strengthen your application.
I will add one more thing to Hamad's perspective, which is, yes, and about diversity also means diversity, geographic, socioeconomic. It's not just ethnic or religious diversity. But one more thing I want to add is I've sat on a couple of boards and application processes and read a lot of essays, not just for Pickering, but for other programs outside of the State Department. And the number one difference I notice is essays that talk about what the program will do for the person versus what the person will do for the program. And you should be sincere. If you're a first generation college student, something unique like that, say what the program would do for you. But I always look for people who want to do something through the program for others. So I think, I'm not saying that will get you in, but that can kind of set you apart.
Thank you so much. That's a great idea. I'll definitely try to incorporate that more in my statements for this round.
Okay, Arthur.
I just had a quick question. For those of us who are graduating or maybe are recent grads, what types of jobs would you recommend pursuing that can refine a skill set that is necessary for an FSO? And I asked that also with a specific emphasis on like roles and, or excuse me, skill sets that you can't necessarily develop in the classroom, in undergrad specifically.
I would say any job that you will excel at and enjoy. I don't think there isn't a specific kind of job or career that will make you more competitive. If you're in a position because you think that that's what it'll do, but you hate it, it'll be obvious. So I would just say pursue what interests you, and the rest will come.
I have had colleagues who were trapeze artists and car salesmen before they joined the Foreign Service. Now, whether that makes you competitive for the Pickering and Rangel fellowships, that might be another story. But I think if you're, a personable person, you have the 13 dimensions and those qualities, and you'll add or bring something to the table, you'll make a great applicant to the fellowships and the Foreign Service.
I think LaShawn's hand went up again, maybe.
I'm sorry, I'm old. I don't know how to take this thing off.
Do any of you have questions about the Foreign Service more generally, our careers, our experiences?
Hamad
have
was
another quick
Georgetown undergrad too.
Well, I do have, this is LaShawn. I do have a question. I'm curious to know, do either of you have experience doing this job with a family or know anybody who has? And this would be a second career for me. So people who are a little bit older and doing it with the family, is it possible? Am I like out of my mind?
I think the average, I'll let Hamad respond too, but the average age, I think, for people who join is like 30 or so. Some of those people have kids, some of those people don't. Some people join at 50. I think even the Foreign Service band, I forget, Hamad, what is it, till 55 you can join, right? So people have kids, and a lot of
yeah,
people have kids too.
Yeah, I would say there's within the Foreign Service, when you're overseas, like the State Department will help you find schools that are, that your kids can go to that are similar to the United States, or international schools in the countries that you're posted to. There are a lot of employment opportunities for spouses. So I would say it's not the easiest career for families, but I would say that the State Department has tried and keeps improving in terms of working with individuals on making sure that, moving a lot, that it's not too difficult on your family. But, you're joining and, you'll be posted overseas every few years and coming back to Washington. And so if that doesn't appeal to you, then don't apply to the fellowships. But if the thought of moving over to different countries around the world in different regions is exciting, then the rest will, it'll be fine for your families if they're in on the adventure. I would say involve your families from the beginning, including in the application process, just to make sure that they understand kind of what you're getting into.
Lauren?
Yeah, I just wanted to know if you had any say as to where you were going to be posted, or if it's more random, or maybe if you already had a language that you knew, or if you had to learn a new language.
So I joined as a fluent Arabic speaker. So naturally, my first posting was to Latin America, where the State Department taught me Spanish. So the answer is no, it's impossible to predict. And even if you come in thinking that you want to work on a specific region and use a specific language, you may eventually, but your first 2 tours are directed by the State Department, and you sign a statement saying that you're worldwide available anywhere in the world. And you get a list, you can rank them, you can express your preferences, you can say why some posts are good or not for your family, but at the end of the day, the State Department will send you where they think they will best use your skills. And for those first 2 assignments, you have to accept that. And starting your 3rd assignment onwards, it's more your own lobbying to decide kind of what kind of assignments you would like and what kind of countries or regions you'd like to work in, or languages you'd like to learn. Hira?
Yeah, I think Hamad's explanation is excellent. My own personal anecdote is I speak Punjabi, so they sent me to Mexico City, and they sent the 2 Spanish-speaking people to Islamabad for our first tour. But by your 3rd or 4th tour, if you love Central Asia, you'll get to Central Asia. If you love Europe, you'll get to Europe. It just takes time, but you'll eventually, if you have a region you love, you'll get there. I don't want to get into this because I'm not an expert, but if you use language points to get into the Foreign Service, then you will have to serve using that language in your first 2 tours, but that does not apply to Pickering and Rangel fellows.
I just wanted to ask if you kind of answered this a little bit, but I just was curious to know how feasible and how often DC tours are within one's career in the Foreign Service. It sounds like you both have done that, so I'm just curious to hear more about that.
Hamad, you've done more, so answer.
So I had a weird scenario where my first assignment was actually DC, which rarely happens. And I have been in DC now for 2 assignments. I would say there's no requirement to serve in DC. You actually have a limit of, I believe it's 8 years of serving in domestically in the United States, you have to go back overseas. But it is very important, and a lot of people do return to Washington for the third tours to understand how the State Department functions, how the interagency process works, how policy is formed in government. And so I think if people want to spend more time in the United States, that's totally fine. But assignments sprinkled out throughout your career, because don't forget, for later on in your career, your assignments are based on, you know, lobbying for those positions. So it kind of is like applying for a job each time you're looking for a new overseas posting. And in that sense, knowing more people, and in Washington, you meet a lot more people than you do at a smaller embassy overseas, can help you for your career. So a lot of people do return to Washington for those reasons.
Yeah, Hamad has worked at the tip, almost the tippy top of the State Department here in Washington, D.C. So he knows the building much better than I do. Some people call Washington, D.C. the sixth cone. There are some people who excel in working at Washington, D.C. And then other colleagues, they want to just be overseas. I spent 10 years straight overseas, minus some language training before coming back to Washington. And then I have other bosses and colleagues who spend at least more than about 2/3 of their career in Washington. The average is usually 1/3 in Washington and 2/3 overseas.
Other questions? Laura.
Okay, so I have another question. I'm really interested in the consular cone, and I was wondering if any of you can talk about any, like the duties of a consular foreign service officer in regards to national security. That's something that I'm really interested in. I focused a lot of my undergraduate career studying transnational crime and security, particularly in Latin America. So I'm just wondering how I can apply that knowledge in the foreign service. So yeah, I'm just wondering what kind of work consular officers do in the area of national security.
I think they're the front line, you know, and you can look at it as defense or offense. Usually we want foreigners to come to America, visit, love it, go back. We want everybody to come legally with a visa. We want open borders. We call it open, what is it? Secure borders and open borders, right, Hamad? I mean, they change the terminology sometimes, but if people are going to use their visa correctly, non-immigrant visa, right, to come for tourism or business purposes, we want them to come, and you're the face of America. When all other services close down overseas, the only service that doesn't close down is American Citizen Services, which is helping Americans overseas. And then the third thing that consular officers do is they also do immigrant visas. That's when somebody applies here with DHS in America, and they're doing that final step of the process. I'm simplifying because, you know, I don't want to talk for my consular colleagues. So there's like those three parts of consular work, but they help bring students to America who want to study in America. They help people coming on H-1Bs, they help answer questions. I did a lot of reports of birth abroad. I did a lot of death reports abroad, unfortunately, you know, for people who pass away. So I think they definitely are like super important. That's why it's the first thing that was open in many countries is consular services. Everything else comes later, even commercial comes after consular. As far as being connected to national security, I think it really depends where you serve. Every post is very different. If you look at national security as economics, facilitating economic trade and visits is part of national security. If you're looking at a country that has insecurity, then that's also that. Or if you're looking at refugees and migration, you're working more with DHS on that, but even that's considered that if you're working in Bangkok or Addis Ababa, you know, there's a lot of things you can do. So I think it's definitely related. I think careers.state.gov probably has a lot of profiles of consular officers you can read about to see more specifically what they do. And I also recommend everybody check out the Diverse Diplomacy series too, although that one is more focused on diversity than just what people do. But I think there's always these amazing profiles online and on Facebook of officers in each of the cones that are really worth checking out.
And every officer, regardless of cone, will be expected to do at least one consular assignment. And all cones, you can pursue assignments and do assignments in other cones. So you're not just strictly limited to whatever your cone is. So you can also balance it out. A lot of consular officers will come back to Washington and work a policy job to better understand that side of it. So there's different ways to strengthen your, your knowledge as a consular officer of the emergency process, how best to work with other agencies, especially as you rise up in the system overseas and work in consular sections overseas.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Anybody else in the last few moments or last few minutes that we have? Otherwise, I can ask. Oh, sorry, someone else is going to go.
I was going to ask the typical, what would you tell yourself if you were applying again? What would you tell the younger version of yourself applying to Pickering and Rangel? Any advice now that you've had many years in the Foreign Service?
I would say not to stress too much about it, that there's no rush. I think we hit on that earlier, but there's many different ways to enter the Foreign Service. Don't give up after one try or feel sad if you don't get either the fellowship or you don't pass the exam. And at the same time, kind of pursue what interests you, because that'll make you a stronger Foreign Service officer as well, especially since as you apply to these fellowships, you're also going to grad school for 2 years. When I look back, I partly wish I had taken a little more time before returning to grad school. I think I would have gotten more out of school if I had more time between undergrad and graduate school. So just to say that, it's sometimes, especially at Georgetown, you want to immediately get that next fellowship, go to grad school, but sometimes getting some work experience actually helps you both, not in terms of getting the fellowship necessarily, but also making the most of grad school. So I would say not stressing too much about immediately jumping into this career.
Yeah, I want to reiterate that when I did the fellowship, I had to go straight to grad school from undergrad. So I had no time in between. I think the people who had time in between, they really learned so much about what they really wanted to do. And they enjoyed grad school and the investment of the free grad school, but it's still an investment much more than I did. The only advice I would give is, I think Laura kind of said it earlier too. And I love it when people doubt themselves and don't apply to things, because it makes the numbers and odds better for me. So don't apply. That's great. You're making it easier for somebody else. Because what's the worst anybody can say to you? No. And then you just apply again. Nobody knows you applied, only you know. And you hone your essay skills, you hone your resume, and each year your application is going to get stronger. So I love when people say they're not going to apply.
I also just make a plug again for Fulbright. For any of those, I mean, Laura's already done a Fulbright, so we can have a separate conversation about Fulbright. But for those of you who are thinking about, perhaps are still students or thinking about like what your next steps are, just to kind of reiterate some things that have been brought up, Fulbright is a great opportunity to think about getting additional experience abroad to then, leverage. I always feel like that's such a businessy word, but leverage that for then thinking about these other kinds of opportunities that would get you closer to the Foreign Service.
Laura, anytime you need me to talk to students, please contact me. I love talking to students about Fulbright and helping them out.
We'll do, Laura, we'll do. So I realize we're at time for our fellows here. So thank you to Hamad and Hira for being here. I really appreciate your time. As I said, I will hang out for a little bit longer for anybody who wants to ask questions, maybe a little bit more like kind of like logistics side of things, or about kind of like application support. So I'll hang on here for a little bit longer for anybody who wants to ask those kinds of questions. But otherwise, thank you for being here.
Thanks, everyone. Good luck.
Bye.
Good luck. Thank you.